All right, welcome back into Carp's Corner, and got a lot of things to discuss here. Bringing about a little bit from last week and what was going on with college football, and where we think that that's going, and kind of how this year is wildly unique with what we've seen thus far. I think starting the season, everybody anticipated that there was going to be three, four, five teams that would clearly delineate themselves, and they would be teams that would run the table and dominate. It would be the usual suspects. It was going to be Bama. It's going to be Clemson, Ohio State, OU, Georgia. Maybe Florida would have something to say about it. Could LSU get back in the mix? But that was going to kind of be it. And I think everybody had kind of acknowledged the fact and just kind of understood that, hey, this is the way college football is now. The haves keep getting richer, and the have-nots, well, they just kind of stay where they are. Well, if this season's taught us anything, that has been flipped mightily on its head. And there haven't necessarily been a ton of huge defeats. Obviously, Oregon beat Ohio State week 2, and so that's going to play into it. But if you start looking at some of these big games and how teams have fared, I think you're starting to see some trends where how good is Georgia really? I mean, they beat Clemson, but how good is Clemson really? They may be strong. These teams may be strong on one side of the ball, and they may try to excuse some things, but there's some underlying issues there that I think are going to begin to rear their ugly head. And so we'll start with Clemson. And they've been terrific for so long. They've had a phenomenal offense for so long. And Travis Etienne rolling around out there, he was fantastic. Trevor Lawrence, they've been rolling in top flight receivers going all the way back to Sammy Watkins, and how bringing these big physical guys that look so good, most recently T. Higgins, and you see what they're doing now in the NFL. So all these guys have been really, really good. Well, all of a sudden it looks like that offensive spigot was kind of dried up. We thought DJ Uiagalelei was going to be really good. He looked like he was going to be the answer, and he still might be. But the one thing people forget, 2020, no fans, guys going on the road. It's not really a road game. And so the maturation process for these players, whether they were playing a ton or not, just going into these environments, being a part of it, experiencing college football, that's big. It's a big, big piece of it. You look at going into the swamp, for Alabama, for instance. You look at Wisconsin going into Penn State. You look at Auburn, or Penn State going into Wisconsin, rather. You look at Auburn traveling to Penn State. There are issues with young players, meaning not professionals or guys who aren't highly experienced in college, when they have to go to these unbelievable environments. And the emotion of the environment and the emotion of the stadium can take over you. And it's not something that's, easily to quantify. And people will talk about it and say, hey, it's not that big of a deal. These guys practice with crowd noise. They play music in practice. I've heard all the excuses. They play music in practice. We work on these things. Our guys are prepared. They're a mature bunch, all this stuff. The only way that you can be prepared for some of these environments is the experience of it. Experience is the best teacher that we absolutely have. So nobody got those experiences last year. I think you beginning to see some of it rear its ugly head here at the start of football season, whether it's Clemson going down to the wire against Georgia Tech, needing a goal line stand. Clemson defense looks mighty good. Clemson offense, probably leaving a little bit to be desired. Doesn't mean they can't be really good, but they're not there yet. Oklahoma's been scoring, it seems like 50, 55, 60 points a game. It was always their defense that was the problem. Well, looks like Alex Grinch may have that defense shaped up a little bit, but Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler, the brain trust that is that Oklahoma offense, very, very talented. This was supposed to be the Oklahoma team that maybe kicked the door in and went and won a national championship and won the college football playoff. They're struggling against Nebraska. And to be one thing if we thought this Nebraska team was really, really good, but I don't think anybody's confusing this with Scott Frost, the coach, to Scott Frost, the player. And so while Nebraska may be better than that week 1 they showed in the loss against Illinois, they shouldn't be in the ballpark. And that's why they're about 3.5 touchdown favorites. A lot of people thought that game was going to be a rout. All of a sudden it's not. And so what does that tell you about Oklahoma? One of the other teams that we perceive to be as elite. Ohio State loses to Oregon. Next week, looks like they should be getting right against Tulsa. It's a 1-score game for most of the game. Offense struggling a little bit for the first time under Ryan Day. Defense so answering some questions, but still not there yet. And the score looks better than ultimately what it felt like during the game, the real feel, if you will. And so it finishes up 41-20. But all these games, as you begin to look at them and kind of veering back, and I'll even throw uh, WVU and Virginia Tech in there. And West Virginia, I didn't think that they'd, be able to take care of the Hokies. It seemed like they were back after they beat the Tar Heels. And all of a sudden, West Virginia looks a little bit better, and they're knocking off a 15th ranked squad. And then, Bama, they're a 2-point conversion away from being tied with Florida. I think Florida's maybe a little better than what people thought. If Emory Jones could get the read option and pull that thing down and make a decision quicker, they may have tied it up. But I think the one thing that we haven't had in college football in so long is parity. And we haven't had the ability to sit here and feel like we didn't know who the teams were going to be at the end. We still think we know for the most part, but this year I think is far different than many others in the fact that we're watching these teams get challenged early, challenged by teams that we didn't necessarily think were in the same talent pool, because it seems like in the last 4 or 5 years, those upsets of the elite schools really haven't happened. And you thought, okay, Clemson, they lose to Georgia. That would probably be their only close game and their only loss. Well, if you look at them now, they've got some other issues that they've got to try to get resolved. And that's not to say that they'll lose another game. Bama looks like they could be a little vulnerable. Texas A&M looks pretty good. There's teams in the West that might be able to challenge them, the SEC West, that is. And then Oregon, obviously with beating Ohio State and looking really impressive and doing it, do they have a shot of potentially coming out of the Pac-12? I mean, they're going to have a very, very strong case, assuming they can get some help and some other teams can potentially win. Pac-12 is struggled a little bit in the non-conference. BYU, they might be the de facto Big 12 or Pac-12 champion once all this is said and done. But, it doesn't help UCLA getting grounded by Frez. Like, that's not a great situation, but, they looked good for a while. And so that was kind of the week that was in college football and how different, unique, and a little bit crazy that it's been. It hasn't been like this in a while. And I for one, personally enjoy it. I don't want to say you're getting bored of college football, because I think it's, the best. I think it's the best sport that you're going to find, with the emotion, the passion, the pageantry, everything that goes into it. But you like seeing competition and you like seeing teams push through. And it's great to see those challengers, test the big dogs and then sometimes come out on top. And so it's not a foregone conclusion when we're sitting here watching the selection shows of, okay, how are they just going to reorder the top 5? So it's nice that we don't have that this year. And to me, I find it a little bit refreshing. So taking a look at some of the bigger games this weekend, we've got Notre Dame traveling to Wisconsin, Camp Randall, unbelievable environment. Can Wisconsin kind of right the wrongs from their early loss to Penn State? Beat Michigan State or Eastern Michigan last week. They look, or 2 weeks ago, look better, but like, this is going to be it. If they can beat Notre Dame, it's going to put them, in a pretty significant spot, then being able to challenge Iowa. And I know it's not a conference win, but it's a confidence win. And that does matter. Beating a big branded school. It's going to be a wild environment over there at Camp Randall. Should be a lot of fun. And then you've got the matchup of the quarterbacks, Jack Cohn, who was the longtime starter at Wisconsin. He gets ousted and usurped by Graham Mertz, who has really looked very pedestrian this year for Wisconsin. So it's not like this is this classic Wisconsin team that goes out, they play great defense, they run the ball pretty well, not quite as good as they could or as they have in the past, but they have relied a lot, and we're expecting a lot of Graham Mertz, and he has not looked like the elite quarterback that they thought he was going to be. Jack Cohn, on the other hand, they put a decent amount on him at Notre Dame. And for the most part, he has risen to the occasion and played pretty darn well. And that's going to be a really solid matchup there. We're going to start the day with. You've got A&M at Arkansas. That's kind of compelling. Arkansas, after they dismantled Texas, like, okay, can you continue to go on your Lone Star State revenge tour and take care of another one of the old Southwest Conference rivals in A&M? Obviously A&M runs the ball really well with Spiller. They're doing a good job. Arkansas, they beat Texas. They've got KJ Jefferson. He gets it done with his legs about as much as his arms, and their quarterback. I think that's another game that could be a little bit of an intrigue. And Believe me, A&M's favored by a decent chunk in this game, but I think it's one that could be possibly a little bit closer than what people think, especially I believe this game is in Arkansas. And so when you get these home games, you get people that are fired up, a fan base that believes that's going to get behind their players, going to make a difference. That makes a difference. It's one of the things that we have seen in these motifs, that you see, these themes that you begin to see throughout college football that are beginning to transcend. Where you play games matters. In 2020, it's really tough to kind of pull any information or any data points from it because it was just such a different year, who was on the field and the environments of which you were playing in. And then finally, a game with a little bit of intrigue. It's about a 17-point line, depending on where you look, but you've got WVU traveling to Norman. I didn't think that this would be a good game, but with WVU looking better, getting some big wins, starting to play a little bit better. There's this element of you thinking like, okay, they just beat Va Tech. OU struggled against Nebraska. Is this a get right game for OU? They able to bounce back, able to play a little bit better? Or is this a situation where, it's kind of a one-off? They're going to go into Norman. OU will be right. Spencer Rattler will run all over them, and Lincoln Riley will be able to dial it up, and they'll be able to get a big win. So, those are some of the intriguing games, intriguing matchups. Not a lot that you're going to find on this college football slate that's going to really get you excited this weekend. So you're going to have to find some, and inevitably there will be good games. It's always how it works. It's just trying to identify and find them. And will those good games, will there be good games of consequence? Meaning, will they have a tangible, real impact on the college football playoff and eventually how this thing will shake out at the end? Now, with that, I want to move to something that, it's been bothering me for a couple of years, and they've tried to get this right. They've tried to change it. Got all the booth reviews and everything else. There doesn't even need to be a flag. The NFL's got the taunting rule, and that I think is ridiculous. It's their first year, and I think it's been way over adjudicated. For college football, it's the targeting, and it's gotten to the point now where you think it's targeting, they don't call it, they review it. Sometimes they call it, sometimes they don't. Then you see plays where like the guy had no other alternative or option, hits a guy in the head, and you're like, okay, what is this? It's 15-yard penalty. Oh, by the way, you're booted out. Then you've got, situations that happen where, an offensive player lowers his head. And you're like, have they ever called offensive targeting on an offensive guy? Maybe. I have that conversation with my dad. He's like, running backs, they always lower their head. They ever get called for targeting? Well, not really. It's kind of not what they're trying to legislate out of the game. It's mostly been the defensive players. And I understand receivers coming over the middle, guys lining them up, going and blasting guys like that. There's no place for that anymore of just going to be headhunters back in the day. And everyone loves the Jack Tatums of the world, guys going, the Steve Atwaters, John Lynch, all these head hunting safeties that used to just cruise the middle of the field and go try to bite people's heads off with a football. Back in the day, some of the guys, the Raiders, Ronnie Lott, the Niners, they're taping like little 1x4s on their forearms. You got these sweet forearm wrist tapes. Little did you know underneath, they got a piece of wood that they're going through and just trying to crack skulls with them. And so obviously we found out that's not safe. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to grow the game. And you can get people to continue to let their children play football, which, by the way, my oldest son plays tackle, and my other two boys will eventually. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it if that's what they want to do. I believe football is one of the greatest games for teaching self-reliance, teamwork, selflessness, toughness, like all of the things in the world that we need. Like outside of getting them in the military, the football field is really one of the few places that you can find it because it's a big team game. There's 11 guys on the field, 11 guys each side of the ball. You have special teams. There's guys who have to bust their butt who have really no chance of ever realistically scoring in a game, but they are just as crucial as the guy who has the ball in their hand. And so you have to learn to kind of sacrifice to yourself. And if you are the star, you have to learn how to be humble, show humility, show class, give respect to your teammates, understand that you're not getting it done without them. And so that's my football soapbox for a moment. But back to the targeting. I believe this thing could be solved up and summed up in two ways. I understand that you're going to have to call penalties. And I understand that it's a big deal and that it's important we keep our young people safe, our young men safe. But to eject somebody from the game for a normal football play, I think is where it crosses the line. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and this is something, that I look at. I'm not saying that it's my original. I'd like to think I thought of it. A lot of other people have kind of concurred with me. I don't think it's something that I'm unique, I guess, in thinking that this is the way it should be legislated. Every targeting, you want to throw a flag, have a penalty for it, great. 15 yards. Whether we think it's a true targeting or not, I'm okay. I can live with that. It impacts the game, but it's not so overly punitive on the individual. I think there should be two types of targeting. Obviously that, where it's a 15-yarder, you look at it, okay, this wasn't intentional. We'll move on. For an ejection, I think two things need to occur. Number one, it needs to be egregious and malicious. And if you want to sit back there and say, well, there's a lot of ambiguity in that, it's going to be tough to kind of draw lines around that and say, what is it? Well, trying to judge contact to the head or neck area. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity in that now too. I mean, we've so far passed the line. It's the same with pass interference and everything else. It's a subjective call. But I reference back with the Supreme Court and child pornography. You know it when you see it. You can identify when someone's out there headhunting. They have the opportunity to take a different course or path, and they choose one to try to light somebody up with their skull, lowering the crown of their helmet. Everybody knows what that looks like. And if you want to err on the side of that, I'm okay with that too. I think that that's fine. Eject them. That's all right. They know the rules. They're choosing to disobey them and to break them. And so to me, that's no different than hitting a guy when he's walking back to the huddle, because I don't think you need to deem that a normal football play anymore. You can romanticize it. I can say I'd like to see it, but it's not going to happen. We're not going to go back to that era. So, okay, got it. That's an ejection. The second one, the habitual line stepper. We go back to little Dave Chappelle show, little Rick James, habitual line stepping. And if you're someone that has two infractions, and maybe neither of them are malicious or egregious, but if you have two infractions in a game, then we can say that's cause for ejection. Because I haven't seen really times where, and I know guys get ejected after one, but you see it happen that often. And so unless somebody continues to do it that way, it may not be egregious or malicious, but they need to make sure that's tried to coach out of them. Sometimes it's unavoidable. And so I'm going to give everybody the out for the sometime. You get two in a game, it's like two technicals, two yellow cards in soccer, whatever it is. Then you're getting the boot. You get two targetings. You get one free one, 15 yards. Second one, you're gone. Unless it's malicious. I think that clears it up a lot. And you don't have this competitive imbalance or this massive swing that happens when someone gets kicked out. I'm sitting here watching the Indiana UC game. Like both of the schools. I feel like I wanted both of them to win. Cincinnati's struggling in the run game a little bit. All of a sudden, the star middle linebacker, who's kind of the heartbeat of that Indiana defense in McFadden, he gets a targeting call, and I'm like, all right, he hit Ritter up high, Cincinnati's quarterback. He's kind of getting ping-ponged around in the pocket. I didn't think it was something that he was like targeting, like maliciously going after. There was an intent there. So it's 15 yards. It's a first down. It keeps the drive alive for Cincinnati. You stay in the game. He gets pulled out. All of a sudden, Cincinnati starts running the ball. And maybe that was just a shot in the arm they needed. And maybe it was coincidence and they would have started playing better anyway. But we'll never know that. And that's the problem. Whether, it's Sean Wade in the Fiesta Bowl against Clemson getting kicked out a couple of years ago for hitting Trevor Lawrence, or whether it's, Clemson's middle linebacker getting kicked out of the Fiesta Bowl last year against Ohio State. Like, I don't want to see either one of them. I want to see guys play football if they're trying to do it the right way. And like I said, you give them the 15-yarder, but you don't need the ejection unless it's happening once. Repeat offenders, folks. That's why there's penalties that are steeper in our judicial system for repeat offenders. That's how it works. Okay. So you can have good intentions, but if you repeat, okay, then you're gone. But that won't make it overly punitive to where guys are getting the boot, because that's no good for anybody. And I don't think it's good for the game. Now, talked about doing a little mailbag this week on Twitter. So got some people that were tweeting in about some things, some questions, that they wanted to have answers to. And so I was hoping I could provide these the best that I could. This year, question one: what has to happen for Cincinnati or any G5 team to make the college football playoff this year? Well, I think Cincinnati's got a great case because they beat Indiana. who Indiana hasn't turned out to be quite what they wanted. And then they got a shot against Notre Dame next week. If Notre Dame ends up beating Wisconsin, they're still going to be in the top 10, and that's going to give a nice data point to Cincinnati. But then they're also going to really need some help. Like, let's just call it what it is. Ohio State lost, that helps. You have Oregon potentially lose, that helps. Clemson's lost, that helps. And so if you can be undefeated in a group of 5 with an Indiana win, a decent Power 5 team, and then a Notre Dame win on your schedule, I think that's as good opportunity as you're going to get. And if you don't get in with that, I don't know if anybody's ever going to get in. And that's just the reality. All the success of the Manning Monday night broadcast, you think any network would consider doing the all 22, having someone like me do it? You know, ESPN does this some for like their mega cast where they're like the coaches tapes and everything. I wouldn't be surprised to see more people begin to leverage this as they realize, like, hey, we're already putting all this money in the production. It doesn't cost that much more to throw a couple guys in a room. We've got all the cameras and to produce it. And if you have the secondary and alternate channels to be able to handle it, I think it's something that other people like. And sometimes you get a little more friendly banter. And then there's something for everybody. You want to see the traditional broadcast? That's all well and good. You want to see something that's a little unique? Couple just players talking it out, coaches on all 22. That's terrific. Another question. What OSU linebacker has flashed the most? How many times in a game does a quarterback need to run until it's a defensive threat? And does Jim Harbaugh put his shopping cart back or just leave it next to the car? Okay, Jim Harbaugh, for all of his quirks and some of the things, not drinking milk and chicken's a nervous bird and all those things, I'd like to think that Jim Harbaugh is principled enough in life to return his cart back to the cart corral. I believe that would be the case. Now, what linebacker I think has flashed the most? Probably freshman Cody Simon. Not playing great. He's not playing perfect. He's not playing perfect. He's doing some really good things out there. He has flashed and made some plays. He still has work to do, like all of those guys, but I think he's the one that's kind of made some splash plays thus far. And as far as how many times does a quarterback need to run before it really challenges you as a defense, I think that's going to be highly situational, because it's not necessarily how many times, it's when the runs come and how punitive they are to the defense. If you're running on 3rd and 8 and you pick up 15 yards, that's devastating. It's devastating. You don't need to run it 20 times. But if you pick up 2 big 3rd downs where it's 3rd and long and you're in a bad spot, all of a sudden now defensively, the next call that you're coming from your coordinator on a big 3rd down is, hey, watch the quarterback run. We're going to spy. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Or if it's in the run game and you're running zone reads or whatever it is as well, and the quarterback pulls it down, rips it for 30, he may only have to do that twice. And then all of a sudden, whoever the responsibility is for him, was defensive end, linebacker, tackle, like, hey, they're going to be locked in a little bit more on the quarterback because the knife cut deep. It doesn't have to be a lot of small slices, which it can be, but I think it's really more of a situational impact of how much it actually hurts you and how much it actually is going to penalize your defense. If they pick up those big 3rd downs, those are emotional backbreakers. You feel like you have a team where you want them to do your job, and the dude pulls it down and rips it. Gosh, you're like, man, there's 15 yards. What are we going to do to stop that? Or it's a zone read. You got everything locked up, and all of a sudden you get a bad read and someone doesn't do their job. That guy's gone, picks up 20. Okay. It's a dry, it hurts. It hurts defensively. It's going to sting you a little bit. So that's there. And then the last question was, would I ever consider coaching? How and when? There's a couple of guys who I told, friends of mine who are players. I was like, you ever get a head job and you call me and you want me to coach in any, in any aspect of the coaching realm, whatever it might be, any job, I'll do it. Whether you want me to coach strength department, linebackers, D coordinator, whatever it is, you're going to be a quality control system. We'll talk about it. I'm fine with that. Not too big for any job. And so it has to be the right person. And then it'll have to also be the right place. There's a couple of people I said, regardless of spots, I would go. Have to have that conversation with my wife. Might not go as well as I thought. And I think they'd be fair to me as well. I've got 4 kids and I like to make sure I can help and be around them. And, that's a very important part of my life. So that's obviously critical, but, and I think the question was probably asked with Ohio State in mind. I mean, I respect Ryan Day enough that I would definitely coach here and I wouldn't have to move my family. I love Ohio State. So those things kind of wrap up into one, but Had conversations with Jason Witten and Romo and a lot of other guys who I had played with or coached or played for. I'm like, if you ever get your dream job, whatever it is, and you think that I'm a guy that you would want, give me a call. It's like, because I support you enough and I know what you're about, because so much of it is in coaching. It's not necessarily where you're at, but it's who you're coaching for. Do you trust them? Do you respect them? Do they respect you? Do they share your belief system about how you should be acting as a husband, a father, as a mentor to young people? Those things really matter. And so that's a big piece of it as well. And so that was kind of the last aspect. So there's a number of guys who I told that to. And thankfully, I haven't gotten that call yet. Maybe I would enjoy it when I did. Time of life right now is a little tough, but the right situation came along. It would always be in play, because I love the game. I loved helping my dad coach in high school. It's 8 years of my life that I'm glad I got to spend with him, on the sideline. And it's something that never really leaves you. It's exciting. And that's why you see guys like John Gruden get back into it, Urban Meyer, all these guys. Dick Vermeil, after 20 years, it calls to you. Bill Parcells called it a powerful mistress. It's exactly what football is, because you get a little taste of it and then you want to get back into it. So right now, I'll just handle talking into a microphone, because the best part about that is you never lose a game. You're always on the winning side. So I appreciate this edition of Carp's Corner, bringing more great stuff to you next week.